This is Fortress News with Jake Zabel.
Hello and welcome to Fortress News. I'm your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Welcome to our April 2021 edition of Fortress News. Fortress News is our Australian Lutheran news podcast released by the Order of Knight George, where we talk about the going-ons in the Lutheran churches of Australia. So we start with our first section by just going through some of the kind of highlight news of the different Lutheran synods. Again, I tell people that I am reading this news based on newsletters and articles and bulletins released by these different synods. I haven't got content for all of them. If anybody has content that I haven't got, can you please send me a link or send it to me? Let me know where I can find it. So to begin with, we look at the Lutheran Church of Australia, the LCA, but particularly focusing on the Queensland district because I still receive the Queensland district newsletter, which I subscribed to back when I was a member of the LCA and was a leader on a few of their different youth camps. And so I still have subscribed to the LCA's Queensland District newsletter. I don't know if the other districts of the LCA have newsletters. I assume they do, but I'm not subscribed to those. So if anybody knows how I can subscribe to those, please send me a link and I will subscribe to them. So I'll begin by looking at the Queensland District of the LCA. And one of their big stories is that Bishop Paul Smith has declined his call to the Wagga Wagga parish in the New South Wales ATC district. So Pastor Paul Smith, the Bishop of the Queensland district, had received a call to go down to the Wagga Wagga parish, and this would then mean that the Queensland district would be searching for a new bishop, but he has declined the call and presumably will remain in his position as Bishop of Queensland. Moving on with some of the other news, they have their district synod and district pastors conference coming up in June of this year. Some interesting news coming up in the Queensland district is that the Nambour Witter parish has called Pastor Matt Teerling, and they are just awaiting his response to them. There are a bunch of other congregations who are initiating calls and looking for people, but they haven't called any particular pastor as of this moment. Events that have happened either this last month, just the general kind of Lutheran women and Lutheran youth have had different events and fraternities and get-togethers. Nothing kind of world-shaking. Coming up in this next month, in the month of May, the Grace Lutheran College will be installing Pastor Stephen Cronow as their pastor there on the 7th of May. On the 9th of May, there is going to be a Lutheran Friends of the Lutheran Archives, the Queensland branch of that is going to be having a meeting. Then otherwise, the only other main event and news coming up is that in June there's going to be the Pastors Conference and District Synodical Conference for the Queensland District. So that's kind of the news coming out of the LCA. So check that out. I don't really know what's going on in the other districts. I'm hoping next month people might have sent me some content so I can check out the other districts. Moving on to the micro synods, we'll look at the Australian Evangelical Lutheran Church. So some news from them is that on the 26th of April, the AELC held their Easter church picnic. So this picnic is normally held on Easter Monday, as I mentioned on last month's edition of Fortress News. However, due to the COVID restrictions and the mask mandates that happened at the start of the month of April, they decided to reschedule, and they decided to go for the 26th of April, which is the Anzac Day observed public holiday. As I mentioned, the invitation on the AELC website says it's open to everyone. However, I mentioned last month that I wasn't sure if everyone meant all AELC members or all people. I did contact the AELC and asked them if it would be okay if my family, who are no longer members of the AELC, whether we'd be allowed to come, and they said we could, and we went along, and it was a fun day had by all. So good event. It was just a Sunday school parish church picnic, just your standard kind of games, activities and stuff like that. Other than that, the AELC doesn't really have much other news going on, so we'll move on to the ELCR. So last month I mentioned that the ELCR does a bi-monthly newsletter. So last month I couldn't tell you what was going on in the ELCR because they don't put out a newsletter in March. But they have now put out the March-April newsletter, so I can give you an update on the news happening in the ELCR. So there's a lot of standard little things like there's hospitalizations of certain members. There's the Toowoomba congregation, one of their members is celebrating its 100th birthday. One of the congregations, they've had a confirmation of 3 members back in January of this year. There's a couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, a young fella celebrating his 21st birthday. So standard kind of just things you might see in like a news bulletin or newsletter. There are 2 particular things I would like to point out. So the first is that the ELCR has done some alterations to one of the hymns in their hymnal. So the ELCR still uses the old Australian Lutheran hymn book. This was the hymn book made by the old ELCR, or Evangelical Lutheran Church of Australia, back in 1921. The ELCR uses the LHB. They've done a reprinting of it. They've made a few revisions to hymns, and particularly in this edition of their newsletter, they are mentioning that they're making a few changes to hymn number 80 in the ALHB. Particularly, the change will be, there are 2 changes being made to this hymn. In verse 2, line 2, it's going to be changed from "to the lowly manger bed" to "Saviour to thy lowly bed." And verse 3, line 2, will be changed from at that manger rude and bare" to "at thy cradle rude and bare." Just before we go moving on to the next news story for the LCR, I was just going to mention what the actual hymn 80 was. So I've got a copy of the Australian Lutheran hymn book as used by the ELCR, and this is in the Epiphany section. Hymn number 80 is titled "As with Gladness Men of Old." So that's the hymn for those who are interested to know what hymn they are making revisions to. The hymn itself is one from 1898, written by W.C. Dix, but that's all the information I have on that. So other news story was that the ELCR on the 21st of March celebrated their Fellowship Day. So this is kind of like the Synodical Conference of the ELCR, although it's also got all lay people coming as well. So it's not exactly like a Synodical Conference, it's their Fellowship Day. And so this was held in King of Roy, Queensland on the 21st of March 2021. Pastor Gavin Winter gave an address based on Ephesians chapter 6 verses 19 to 20 called "Boldly Confessing the Gospel." Pastor Bryce Winter preached the sermon for the day based on John 19:38 to 42, and Pastor Tim Winter also presented a paper in the afternoon titled "Steadfast, Abounding in the Lord, Standing Firm on Christ in the Midst of a Hostile World." His paper addressed 6 issues: knowing who God is, knowing that you are purchased by God through Christ, knowing you are led by God, knowing that God is leading you to your eternal home, knowing God by daily devotion and prayer, and finding the blessings of God in trial. So that's all the news coming out of the ELCR. So we'll move on to my own church, the COELC. We really haven't had much news in the month of April, just the standard. We had our kind of standard Holy Week services. We're now into the season of Easter. No real new additions, and do you think to the COELC as of this present moment? There's always people we're chatting with and people I've got doing confirmation and stuff like that. So there's always potential new members and new congregations and stuff out there, but at the moment, nothing new. One big thing that I can mention is that the congregation I serve, the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, we've decided to start recording our services. So I usually do 2 services on a Sunday, a morning service for those here in Australia who can gather physically, and then I do an afternoon service for the online people. And I've generally done this via video chat. So I'll have my laptop set up and the people will join in via Facebook video chat, and they will watch the service, and because I can speak to them, I'll give them confession, absolution, and we can have a bit of an interaction with the members via online video chat. I've decided now to use a camera as well during this second service to video it for those who can't attend, because I have some members that can't, due to time, make the online afternoon service. We have some people that haven't been able to make services, some people who can make it some weeks but not other weeks, and so I've decided to, in addition to doing the video chat service, to record the service as well for those who can't join us, and also for people who aren't members of the COELC if they'd like to check out what our services are like and listen to the sermons I preach. So just head over to the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church YouTube channel and you'll be able to find it there. You could also just find it by searching Pastor Jake Zabel. I normally have my name in the descriptions on the video, so you should be able to find the channel by searching my name. Finally, we wrap up our segment of going through the churches by looking at Pastor Stephen Vanderhook. So for those who don't know, Pastor Stephen Vanderhook was a pastor in the Lutheran Church of Australia, but earlier this year decided to leave the LCA. He took himself off the roster of pastors and broke fellowship with the LCA. He is no longer a member of the LCA, and he is looking at starting his own independent Lutheran congregation. He has a newsletter. You contact him if you'd like to get a copy of the newsletter. It is a subscription-based thing, so just ask him how do you subscribe to it. It's free subscription. Just contact Pastor Stephen Vanderhook and he'll send you the link to click on to subscribe. In the newsletter, he's got a whole big news section. He's announced that he has a place where he will be holding services. This will be at the Public School Club in Adelaide. He'll be having regular services there on Sunday morning. There's the address given there. I'm not going to give it here on air. He has also stated that he's going to spend the first few weeks doing non-communion services, planning to have his first communion service on Pentecost. I believe the reason he is doing this is because Pastor Stephen Vanderhook is wishing to practice closed communion, and so he doesn't want to have that initial barrier of having people visit but not commune, and so he's hoping for the first few weeks to have people visit and there's no communion, and if they are intending to become members of his church, he's given them a couple of weeks to talk to him about leaving the LCA, joining his congregation and becoming communicant members there. He's also got on his church calendar that on April 25th he started his inquirers class for people who are interested in becoming members of his church, and that the first service will be held on this coming Sunday, the 2nd of May. So get in contact with Pastor Stephen if you'd like to talk to him about that, if you'd be interested in entering into communion fellowship with him. He's got there in his newsletter that if people are in the Adelaide area or even interstate or international but would like to enter into fellowship with him, contact him and you can talk to him about how you go about entering into fellowship with him and getting communion from him. So that's all the news that I have from the different synods. I'm now going to move over to our reporter segment of Fortress News. Just a reminder that if anyone would like to be a reporter for Fortress News and tell us about your synod, just contact me and we can arrange a time to do a monthly report about your synod. So just contact me via Facebook is the best way to do that. So let's now jump over to our reporter segment of Fortress News. Move on to our reporter segment for Fortress News, and back again is our regular Aletheia reporter, Vicar David Cathie. So just before we get him to give us the news, again, Vicar David, would you like to just tell people a little bit what is Aletheia, and then we'll move on to the news?
Well, Aletheia is a new and emerging synod, so we do a lot of international work as well as work around Australia. We have myself and another vicar, Eric Pedersen, He's up in Kempsey, and I'm obviously down here in Victoria. We service pretty much as we can throughout Australia, and do a lot of the online services, so as that way it makes it accessible for as many people as possible.
As for the news report, this is the April edition, so we're now at the end of April. What has Aletheia done this last month, and what are some of the things we could expect in the month to come?
Well, we survived Holy Week, as I'm sure all the pastors out there can relate to. It's very, very busy. So, and upon finishing that, we began the small catechism class for this year. We began that on the 21st, so last Wednesday. Had a few return travellers to the class, so people back from last year, which was good to see. It's always good to see familiar faces. And had another edition all the way from Ohio in America, so which has been really edifying, and they seem very interested in getting what they can out of the small catechism class. Outside of that, there hasn't been a great deal of other stuff go on within Australia. A couple of the other vicars from around the world have had a few things going on, and I'd also like to send best wishes to one of our vicars, Chris Moore, over in the UK, who mourns the loss of his father but celebrates his father joining the saints of all time.
And what are some things that people could expect from Aletheia in the upcoming month?
In the upcoming month, I will obviously be continuing to run the small catechism class, so everyone from all walks of life are welcome to join that. And then the Genesis study, which I should hopefully be getting approved after some scrutiny from my overseeing bishops. And I should be looking at starting that within the next month or sometime next month. Well,
if anyone wants to check out Aletheia, where would be the best place to send them?
We do have a website, AletheiaLutheran.com, I think was the bit at the end, either .com or .org, one of those two. And they can see a little bit more about us, what we do, believe, teach, and confess, what we subscribe to, and what we refute as well. So, that would be a good starting place for people that are interested. And they can also find me on Facebook. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go through it all, and should be able to provide them anything a bit more specific that they might be after. Yeah,
I'd recommend people that if you do have questions about Aletheia, do search out David Cathie, just mainly because out of all the Aletheia guys I know, he is the one that tends to get back to me the quickest. So you can contact the other guys, but they often tend to be a little bit busier. Not to say that David's not busy, but David's just pretty good at responding pretty quickly. So if you got questions, talk to him first, and he'll probably be able to direct you where if you need more.
I usually make the promise, Pastor Jake, if my eyes are open, I'm on call.
Well, thank you, David, for coming on again for Fortress News to give us the monthly update on Aletheia, and we'll hopefully see you again next month with some more news.
Thank you for having me, Pastor Zabel.